All right, Nuggets fans, welcome into Pickaxe and Roll, brought to you by our good friends over at Bet on the Line. I am your host, Ryan Blackburn at NBA Blackburn on Twitter, part of the Mile High Sports Podcast Network, and I'm excited to be hanging out here on a Monday night, late night podcast. Apologies that my schedule has been very erratic over the course of these last few weeks. I've been trying to enjoy a little bit of a break, enjoy a little bit of off time here. As you guys know, I moved. I'm still trying to get settled in at this other place, but that coincided obviously with the deep off season, which we are about to start in earnest, as there's not a lot after the Olympics. There just isn't, and I'm excited for it because I've got some other projects that I'm working on. I got some other things for Mile High Sports that I'm working on that I'm very excited to not share now, but eventually share. And it should be interesting to see just where those things go. But make sure to keep it tuned in here. Make sure to keep it all locked into Mile High Sports. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Would really appreciate that. Going to be 3 segments today. First segment, I'm going to go over the back end of the Olympics, the final rounds of everything. Just kind of talk through what happened and some of the fallouts from that. Second segment, I'm going to do something that's not necessarily my speed, my style, but like I wanted to talk about Jokic in the grand scheme of rankings because I think that he is putting together this incredible resume, obviously, that includes now a bronze medal for Serbia, which is a big deal. It really is. And I'm going to talk about some of his stats, some of the numbers, what they say. Third segment, we will go over some questions that I asked on Twitter earlier today about the Denver Nuggets schedule. So a fun show, interesting show, should be good. Jose or Josie, I'm sorry if you're not pronouncing it well. Thoughts on Bo Nix? This is a fun way to kick off the Nuggets podcast. Anybody that saw my tweet yesterday about how the Broncos quarterback is always going to outshine anything else happening in Colorado sports, it's true. Looks like Bo Nix is going to be a factor for the Broncos this year. I will say he went against the second team and third team defense for the opposition in a preseason game yesterday. So I don't put the cart before the horse before you see what he looks like against the top lines. But who knows? It'll be fun to watch, and that's really the most important thing. Hopefully he can bring some winning to the Broncos. That would be fun. They're just so boring right now. So at least having a rookie quarterback that can do some stuff would be good. Okay, let's get into it. But first, I got to pay some bills. Let's talk about Bet Online, the world's most trusted betting platform and your number one source for everything football. Speak of the devil. From the preseason NFL to college kicking off, Bet Online has every stat, every matchup, and even live odds and spreads while the games are being played. Think you know your stuff? Get in on our winner-take-all $300,000 NFL Survivor pool for the upcoming season. When the game's over, head on over to their online casino, get in on a game of blackjack or slots or some poker. Head on to their website today and use promo code BELIEVE, BLEAV, to get in on the action. Bet Online, the game starts here. Okay. Let's get into it now. Olympics just wrapped up, and I think it's important to fully appreciate that Team USA did a really, really impressive job on their way to gold. The last few minutes of Steph Curry, frankly, the last 2 games of Steph Curry were vintage Steph Curry, like just the absolute best that you could ask for from him, taking the top off of the defense, making sure that they have no hope, no breath of fresh air, always have to send 2 to the ball, always leaving somebody else open. The final shot that he hit, that's got to rank up there in terms of one of my favorite shots I've ever seen live. Just unbelievable. Actually, not live. Let me rephrase that. I was just watching at home. But like one of my favorite shots I've ever watched before. Just unbelievable. And it's who he is. It's just what he is. And he struggled at the beginning of this group stage. And then when the knockout tournament started hitting up and then like you start getting into the elimination rounds, Steph Curry became Steph Curry again. Was really, really fun to watch. The best part of Team USA, undoubtedly. And it was interesting watching how everybody else got kind of tight except for LeBron, Kevin Durant, and Steph Curry. There are some other things that I think like you could really point to. There were a lot of guys that played pretty well. Joel Embiid only played 11 minutes in the championship in the gold medal game, but against Serbia, I thought he played really well in his minutes against Jokic. Um, a variety of other guys played well. Anthony Davis played extremely well in the gold medal game, whereas he did not play well against Jokic in Serbia, which is abnormal, obviously. You'd think that AD would perform a little bit better in that situation, but he did not. But it was still cool to see all of the top players on Team USA bounding, like combining together, doing everything that they needed to do to get the job done. And France made them work for it. They really did. Every single dagger three that Steph hit was immediately followed by a France three on the other end. Like they were staying attached. It was going back from 6-9 to 6-9, like for the entire second half of the fourth quarter, it felt like. But it was really cool to see Team USA kind of rally around those three guys, Steph, LeBron, KD, and the pecking order was clearly established in that. I was also impressed by Devin Booker throughout all of that. Obviously, he was the guy who was on the floor for much of this, whether it was Drew Holiday also out there, or Derek White, or Anthony Edwards, or a range of bigs from Bam Adebayo and others. Devin Booker ultimately became the starter, and he was the guy who started every single game, I believe, for Team USA, which is very rare. Only Steph and LeBron actually were the other guys to join him. And it was very impressive to watch him sort of evolve his role and kind of adapt around what the other guys needed. And so if other teams had this unbelievable wing that they needed a defensive guy for, then maybe Booker wouldn't have been out there. But he was a guy who was able to space the floor, play pretty good defense, and do some secondary creation when the ball found him. So really impressed with Booker. But yeah, you expect Team USA to do it. You expect Team USA to be that team. And I'm not surprised that this went down. I'm actually like this is exactly how I thought this thing would go, where Serbia would give them trouble even after they had dominated, like Team USA had dominated them in the scrimmage and then in the group play game. It was clear that Serbia hadn't given their all in terms of showing everything, the maximum amount of effort, the maximum amount of Jokic touches, things like that. They didn't show everything until that final matchup against Team USA. They threw everything that they had. And Team USA survived because they have the talent and they executed better than Serbia did in the fourth quarter. But it was still an impressive run from Jokic and Serbia. Clearly, Kevin Durant was salty about that if you were paying attention to social media over the weekend. But look, I don't really care about that. I think that it's important to show like pride in basketball. And you don't just have to have pride for your country. You can have pride for other players and teams. And like, that's what the Olympics are all about. It's supposed to like showcase the best talent in the world and the best play in the world. And sometimes you latch on to a Japanese figure skater or somebody doing the luge or like somebody like a long jumper or whoever that's from a different country other than your own. And so I don't understand why Kevin Durant was as salty as he was. He went after Swipa if you didn't see it, but it was still interesting. And I thought that Serbia really acquitted themselves extremely well against a powerhouse, like the best that the USA could possibly offer. Serbia took them to the wire, and then France took them to the wire too. I was really impressed by them. Wemby, shot selection for Wemby wasn't great in that final game, but he still, when he got shots in the middle of the floor, in the middle of the paint, obviously converted them at a high level. His defense is still really good. And guys like Gershon Yabusele, Isaiah Cordnier did not play well, but Evan Fournier did. Nando De Colo did. Guys like that. It just shows that in a one-off game where the talent gap was so wide for so long for Team USA, the camaraderie and the chemistry and the talent gap is shortening just a little bit of that margin for error that Team USA has. And it made for some great, great games. And that's what it was supposed to be. Like Team USA was supposed to win at the end because they had the most talent and they started playing the best brand of basketball that they could. There were times where they fell away from that, and that's when they struggled the most. But that was also the other teams trying to take them out of their element. So just really impressive stuff from the entire world, frankly. And Team USA was supposed to win, and they did. With regard to Serbia, I think that like a lot of folks have come out and come against Jokic and been like, he got outplayed by Embiid in that game. A lot of the pressures being taken off of him by the Serbian guards, things like that. I don't really agree with any of those takes. I thought that Jokic empowered Serbia like a real leader and somebody that gave his team belief in what they were doing throughout that run, and Jokic adapted to what the skill sets were for each of the players, whether it was Alexa Abramovich or whether it was Vasa Micic, whether it was Marinkovic or Kuduric or any of these guys. Obviously, Bogdan Bogdanovic, he's got plenty of chemistry with. But it was really interesting to see how he played, and sometimes there was a second center on the floor, and Milutinov, or it was a more traditional, not even traditional, but like a smaller big man in Petrusev, who was on the floor for much of the time having to guard LeBron James and Kevin Durant, obviously wasn't capable for that. I thought that Nikola Jokic wasn't great in the entire tournament for much of it. He needs to be better if Serbia is going to have a chance going forward, but he'll be 4 years older. I think that Jokic will play in 2028. I think that he plays again. I think this isn't Serbia's only run, but I do think that Jokic is going to play again. And I think that there will be a pretty solid chance between Nikola Topic, Jovic, obviously Jokic leading the way. Serbian basketball is still going to be very, very good in 2028. And I could see them medaling again. Whether they get a gold or not, I don't know. But Team USA, I think, will be worse. I don't think that they're going to be that much worse, but they're going to be worse. I think France will be a superpower. There's no doubt about that, with Wemby leveling up the way that he is, but also the rest of the talent in the NBA evolving around like from France. Like there's so many other players. Alexander Sarr just entered, Zachary Risache, both top 2 picks in this draft. And then you've got a lot of other young guys that are still joining as well that didn't actually make that team. It's you're gonna have to make up for no Nicholas Batum and no Evan Fournier. Those guys are unbelievable. Just a lot of fun to watch those guys throughout this thing. Gershon Yabusele, absolutely. But it's going to be very interesting to see what happens with them. Charles asks, Ryan, what % chance would you give us on the Nuggets acquiring Bogey? That was another point that I was going to make. I think that Bogey's got to be a Nugget at some point, man. Like the way that he and Jokic play together, the confidence that Bogey has shooting the basketball while Jokic is kind of facilitating everything. Those guys have the chemistry to make sure that they are generating good shots, good possessions, but there's just such a comfort level there that it kind of feels Murray Jokic-esque in a lot of ways. Denver couldn't really acquire Bogdanovic this offseason unless they traded Michael Porter Jr., and there have been some trade proposals. I don't know who could have come up with those, but Bill Simmons was talking about a potential Michael Porter for DeAndre Hunter and Bogdan Bogdanovic trade. Wonder where he could have gotten that idea from. And I think that there is some merit to something like that down the line. Only if it works, though. Only if it makes sense for Denver to move off of Porter. I also think that there's a possibility that they don't have to move off of Porter, that because they are now under the luxury tax second apron, that they have the ability to aggregate salaries like Zeke Naji, like potentially Russell Westbrook for a player like Bogdan Bogdanovic. I don't know if that's ultimately what happens. Denver's going to have to probably find some more salary to aggregate, but maybe it's Zeke and Sharch or somebody like that in order to get to the number. But then you lose a lot of front court depth. So, going to be tough for them to figure out how to do it. But there is a possibility that they could. Last thing, I think that Canada, like we obviously didn't need to talk about them that much, but such a disappointing finish for them, for Jamal Murray, for Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, where he could have been the best player of the tournament, but ultimately was very bothered by what France brought. Clearly, France was able to advance past Germany as well and then gave US trouble. So it wasn't that crazy of a loss. But I think that there is absolutely a world where Canada's back and they have a good chance if Zach Edey does take off. He's going to have to take off, though. There is a potential for him to pop in the NBA, but I think that Edey specifically could be really good for international play where you could just dump it into the 7'4" guy who's like 290 pounds, and he's just going to be bigger than everybody else and can get them some easy baskets. That was the one thing that really stood out about Canada, was that they couldn't get a lot of easy baskets. They were taking a lot of jumpers, a lot of off-balance dribbling maneuvers, some floaters, things like that. I think that if they had somebody like Zach Edey to set some really good screens, give them some space, that could really help them. All right, let's take a break. Actually, here, a couple more comments. Ari asks, Ryan, can you comment on my Ayo Dosunmu comment? It would be a great fit to increase their title chances. Yeah, I mean, I've talked about Ayo Dosunmu before. He's at the top of my list of what Denver could potentially like acquire. But your comment on Zeke, one of Tyson or Pickett, and significant draft picks for Ayo and Torrey Craig, Denver doesn't have significant draft picks. They've got one first-round pick that they can offer out there. So Chicago just may not be willing to do that. And if they're not, then I'm not surprised, because that's not a great package. Like Zeke, Hunter Tyson, or Jalen Pickett and a first-round pick in 7 years doesn't really seem super enticing. So I can see why that hasn't gotten done yet. Jose asks, do you think Jamal's performance at the Olympics will change the making of money offered in the new extension? I don't know. I've talked about this before. I think that Denver, it's going to look weird if the contract that they actually settle upon is different from the original agreed upon contract that Shams put out there. I think that they will probably come to the 4-year, $208 million extension, but the amount of money that's actually guaranteed on that is where we sort of are probably going to miss out on some stuff. So I'm curious. We haven't obviously heard about an extension yet since Jamal got back. It's been a few days. I don't know where he is. I don't keep tabs on him, but I have to imagine that because they're done with the Olympics, that could start hearing some news about that in short order. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to discuss Nikola Jokic and the version of peak Jokic. Should be a very good conversation. We will be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. All right, we're back. Pickaxe and Roll. Ryan Blackburn here. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Appreciate all the love and support on the podcast. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Would really appreciate it. Okay. Peak Jokic. I obviously look, you give him credit. You give Serbia credit for a bronze medal. I don't think it obviously doesn't mean as much as a gold medal, although varying cases could justify that a bronze or silver for an international country is probably worth just as much as a gold for Team USA because of the proportion of talent. But once I start getting into that, people are going to start calling me an op for the United States, so I'm not going to do that. How long will peak Jokic actually last? I think it's a fair question. I think that the last 4 years for Joker, he's played 294 games. He's played over 10,000 minutes. He's got a lot of accumulated numbers. Let me just take you through some of the numbers that he's accumulated over the last 4 years. Obviously, we can talk about the accommodations, the awards. He's won an MVP, or he's won 3 MVPs. He's won a Finals MVP. He's got a ring over the course of these 4 years. 10,024 minutes is 7th behind Mikal Bridges, DeMar DeRozan, Jason Tatum, Anthony Edwards, Nikola Vucevic, Domantas Sabonis. He is 4th in points at 76-77 behind Luka, Tatum, and Giannis. He is 2nd in rebounds behind Rudy Gobert. He is 2nd in assists behind Trae Young. He is 5th in steals behind DeJounte Murray, Fred VanVleet, Matisse Thybulle, and Anthony Edwards. And he is 37th in blocks because he had to be lacking somewhere. It really is incredible to see that, because like how your versatility, obviously, on the basketball court, I think is probably the most important trait that you can have. How many areas of the game can you impact at the same time? How is your play impacting winning? And most of the time when you're accumulating numbers like that, it's generally a good thing. You're allowing other people to focus on other things because of what you do. And Jokic has scored, rebounded, assisted, and stole more than just about anybody in the NBA over the last 4 years. And that bears itself out in the advanced metrics. 62.8 win shares over 4 years, first by a mile. Giannis is second at 44.9. That's a 17-18 gap. 13 BPM, plus 13. That is first by a mile. Giannis is second at 9.4. 38.0 VORP, first by a mile. Luka and Giannis are tied at 25.5. And then a 31.6 PER, which is tied with Joel Embiid. Embiid per minute has been just as productive. The difference is Jokic can stay on the floor. It has consistently stayed on the floor, which has allowed him to separate in a variety of these metrics. But then it got me thinking, okay, there's a lot of numbers I can throw out to people. There's a lot of different things I can showcase, a lot of different numbers I can put out there. Some people are just going to go blind to some of those numbers. But then there's also like, okay, how can you compare different seasons? How can you compare different eras? Things like that. You can't. There's certain things that you can just never do. But I'm going to show a graphic here about the peak box plus minus for each of these 5 players in NBA history. Ready? Did a thing here. 300 games of excellence. This is the players with the highest box plus minus over a 300 game span since 1984-85, when box plus minus goes back to. So you're not getting guys like Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Wilt Chamberlain, maybe even Oscar Robertson, players like that. You're missing the front end of Larry Bird, so potentially some missed numbers here for those guys. But you just look at the numbers here, and this is the highest possible box plus minus that those guys achieved over a 300 game span. Jokic is leading Michael Jordan, LeBron James, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Kevin Durant. I've got the dates down there as well. That's a crazy graphic, and I'll throw it back up there eventually so that people can have some more context. But I wanted to do that, and I did some research. That comes from Sports Reference, for what it's worth. Because so many people, like, you just say box plus minus, you say some of these advanced metrics, and people are like, okay, yada, yada, whatever. It's hard to compare sometimes across years, across time periods. That is a comparison directly. What Jokic is doing over the course of these last 4 years or so is nearly unparalleled. Michael Jordan is in the picture, which is insane to even say something like that. I wanted to put those numbers out there in context for Jokic, in context for what we have seen. He just led a team of Serbian stars who most of them are not in the NBA. Most of them will never be in the NBA. Like, some guys are pretty talented enough. Like Marko Guduric, for example, wasn't good enough to stick around in the NBA, but still a very good player. Still a player who's carved out a crazy career across the pond. But Jokic helped lead them. Jokic helped put them into a position where they could actually succeed. against a team like the USA, against Australia before that, and then ultimately to earn a bronze medal against Germany. Some of those guys are never going to come over. Some of those guys never going to be unbelievable NBA talents. But Jokic and his skill set, he is one of the best at propping up people around him, about assuming responsibility so that others don't necessarily have to, simplifying everybody else's role, helping them fit into something a little bit more manageable. Jokic does that better than just about anybody. And the great thing about his game is that he's adaptable. So players like Vasa Micic and Aleksa Avramovic, two vastly different point guards, one of them more of a defensive first energy point guard, one of them more of an offensive creator, somebody who likes the ball in his hands. Jokic can be functional against either of those guys and still be the best player in the world by a mile. And the fact that he has been the best player in the world by a mile for, not a mile, I guess, but like a significantly best player in the world for multiple months now bordering on multiple years, is, I think, emblematic that in an era where there's a lot of great players playing right now, you've got those other guys, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, LeBron James, who are at the tail end of their careers. Jokic is still clearly in a league of his own at this point. And I think you can put a case forward that he's already one of the top 10 greatest players ever. I don't know how good the case would be because, in my opinion, you need not just excellence at your peak, but also sustained excellence. You need to win. Jokic has won. He's won a championship already. But when you get into the top 10, you start talking about, yeah, you need multiple rings to qualify. Like, that's just a fact. You need multiple rings to even consider getting here. Jordan has 6. LeBron has 4. Magic has 5, I want to say. Kareem has, I think, 5, maybe 6. Bill Russell obviously has 11. There's a lot of, like, Steph Curry has 4. Like, all of these guys have so many rings. Larry Bird has 3. I'm just listing guys. Like, there are players like Kobe Bryant who may not have been as good as Jokic has been at his peak. But because Kobe has, like, he did it for so long and accumulated numbers from when he was 18 years old all the way up through, I think, 35, 36, there is just a gap there where the accumulation of numbers and accolades and success over that time, Jokic is still going to have to do. The good thing is that he's still just 29, and that the next 5 years or so, the 4, or at least the 4 years that he's got under contract now, and then potentially beyond that if he's feeling frisky, he'll have time to bolster those numbers, to potentially win again, to maybe win multiple times. Now, it's on the Nuggets to build the best possible team around him, because what Jokic is doing right now at his peak is unbelievable. And I just think it's important for Denver to continue pushing forward as much as they possibly can, to sustain as much excellence as they possibly can over the course of his prime. Because the prime is going to end at some point. Like, the last 4 years that I just described, Jokic's responsibility was higher than just about anybody at all. And that builds on you. We talked about Jokic's three-point shot, I think, in a previous pod. It didn't come back against the USA. He still went 0 for 6. And that to me is a big deal. Like, he is going to need to shoot at the tail end of his career, or in the latter stages of his prime, and then beyond that, he's going to need to space the floor so he doesn't have to be as physical. Because the thing about physical players is they wear down pretty quickly. Jokic has already, like, been as physical for as long as just about anybody in this current era of basketball. Other than Giannis. Giannis is definitely one who I think is in a different category there. But because of what he's done, because of what he's already done, I think he's already on the borderline of top 10 status. You can argue where, you can argue how close, you can argue that he's still outside the top 15. And I think that would be a reasonable argument as well. But guys like Kevin Durant, guys like Kobe Bryant, Larry Bird, Hakeem, Oscar Robertson, Julius Erving, guys in that nature, like they just got to watch out right now, because if Jokic continues what he's doing and Denver actually does win, then we're talking about like a clear top 10 player ever, because the peak is already there. And that's what I tried to express. From a numbers perspective, the peak is already there. Now it's just about longevity and winning. And I think he can do it. I think he can do it for sure. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we are going to discuss kind of battling back against that Jokic peak argument. We're going to talk about reducing the role of the starters in this particular season. We will be right back on Pickaxe and Roll. And we're back. Final segment, Pickaxe and Roll. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Would genuinely appreciate it. All right. The Wilt rule, I think it's important. Like, you just need multiple in order to be in that tier, to be in that level. Like, having multiple championships is very, very important. So we will see if Jokic and the Nuggets can get one. All right. Final segment, as I mentioned, the Nuggets are in a different time now. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. I think it's important to acknowledge that the Nuggets at this point are, I've described it as this before. When you're a competitor, when you're a championship contender, there's a certain amount of time of which you are granted to be at the top of your game. I think Denver's past the half-life of where they are for their game specifically. Jokic is 29, Murray's 27, but he's already like physically worn down by the burden he's had to carry, by the injuries he's sustained. Michael Porter Jr., though he played 81 games last year, is still somebody that you don't necessarily want to like carry a heavy physical burden and like just basketball burden more than he has to because of his injury history. And then Aaron Gordon, who kind of like Giannis, like I think he's just playing a very physical game, somebody who is always banging, who's always trying to be physical, and that wears on you. And Gordon's eventually going to turn 30, and I think that his prime is going to be lessened because of the role that he's playing for Denver right now. So, with that in mind, I think it's time for the Nuggets to start thinking about how they can reduce the burden of their stars, how they can reduce the burden of their main starters. This doesn't include Christian Brown or Julian Strawther or Peyton Watson or anybody that could potentially be the fifth starter for the team. Russell Westbrook, I guess. This involves Jokic, Murray, Porter, Gordon. And I put out on Twitter today a poll that I'm not going to link to, but I did. And the premise was, if you were running the Nuggets and your goal was to win a championship, how many regular season games would Nikola Jokic play? Would Jamal Murray play? Would Michael Porter play? And would Aaron Gordon play? And I gave 4 options for all 4 guys. Under 65 games, they don't meet the criteria for awards. You're going to make sure that they aren't available for that time. 65 to 75 games, they meet the criteria for awards, but they don't necessarily play a full season. 76 or more, you're playing basically as much as you want to. If you're healthy, you're playing. And then the 4th one was whatever wins 50 plus games. However you get it done, just get it done. Doesn't necessarily matter how many games those guys play. And for Jokic, the poll response has been overwhelmingly, like at least 68% of people wants 65 to 75 games played for Jokic. They don't want him to be ineligible for awards or anything like that, but they do want him to play fewer games. And I think it's a very fair request, because if you look at Jokic's games played, as we talk about aging and age curves and how long a peak can be sustained for, Jokic this last year played 79. He averaged over 34 minutes a game. The year before he played 69. The year before he played 74. Year before that he played 72. Year before that he played 73. The 72 and 73 numbers were shortened seasons. That was actually 100% of the games that were played. And the year before that, he played 80 games. So he's played a lot of games. He's played a lot. But the best year of his career, I think, statistically, was the year that he played the most games, 2022-23. I think that was his best statistical year. Maybe not his best actual impact year, but certainly the best statistically. And he only played 69. So I think there is a precedent to trying to get him some rest, to try to allow him to take some time off during the regular season, especially games like random game in November, random game in January, random game in March. You don't need him out there for all of them, and you can take a loss. Let him rest. And especially with him coming off of the Olympics here, in about 6 weeks, he's going to be back in town for Denver. There's not a lot of time for him to recover. So he's going to take as much time as he possibly can. Denver's not going to bring him back until media day, but media day is in 6-7 weeks. So I think that games rested should be an important thing for him. With Murray, it was interesting. The larger audience has basically said, we want him to play under 65 games. About 45% of the votes have been for under 65 games. And I'm not surprised by that, based off of, you want to make sure that Murray's healthy for the playoffs. The problem that you run into here, so basically 45% voted for under 65, 39% voted for 65 to 75, 7% and 8.7% voted for 76 or more, or whatever wins 50-plus games. So I think people have a real opinion on what Murray should do, how many games Murray should play. And there's enough people out there that just want to see him healthy that I think people are Nuggets fans are willing to see him rest in order to ensure that he is ready for the playoffs. Because he wasn't healthy for these playoffs, but he only played 59. So I'm not sure what the best case is. I think whatever gets you to the playoffs healthy is probably the right answer for Jamal. But for Jokic, I think people pretty clearly feel 65 to 75 games is the right call. Same for Michael Porter, by the way, and same for Aaron Gordon. 50% of people, 57%, excuse me, they want to see Michael Porter play about 65 to 75 games. And then 66% of people want Aaron Gordon to play in between 65 and 75 games. I kind of had a feeling that it would break down like this, where that would be the most valued total. But I think everybody's just of the mind, Nuggets fans specifically, that you got to rest these guys. The reason why I did this again, this last year, Jokic played 79, Murray played 59, Porter played 81, Gordon played 73. Gordon looked pretty tired by the end of it. Porter didn't have a lot of gas left in the final few games of the series against Minnesota. He didn't have a lot left to give. Jokic, I think he could have gone on forever, but you could clearly see him still wearing down. And I think part of the three-point shooting woes are because he's tired. Not necessarily because of the wrist, not necessarily because of anything else. I think he's most of the thing is that he needs to, Jokic just needs to be well rested and focused. Those are the two most important things for his 3-point percentage, not his wrist. And then Murray obviously was not anywhere clearly, he wasn't clearly good enough in the playoffs. Needed to be better, needed to be more consistent. That was very clear. I don't think that was, part of that was health related, but I'm not sure Denver could have done anything about that. That was mostly just kind of a fluke thing. So whatever Denver needs, like those four combined for 292 games, an average of 73 games, I personally think that they need to reduce that average so that each of those guys is playing on average about 70. Maybe that means that Jokic plays 72, Porter plays 74, Gordon plays 70, Murray plays 62. Maybe that's the number that you kind of come out to. I would hope, if I were Jamal, if I were the Nuggets, that the guy that you're about to pay $50 million a year is playing more than 60 to 65 games every single season. But you play the hand you're dealt too. Like, you can't just say, "Oh yeah, like screw you, man. Like we're going to force you to play 75 games because we paid you this money." That's not how it works, because you want to make sure that he's ready for the playoffs and ready to go. It's a really difficult thing. Denver's in a really difficult spot with it, and I'm still trying to figure it out myself. How do you do this? How do you make sure how do you make sure that you are ready to go for the playoffs? That's really all that matters. Like, Denver doesn't need to prove that they're a top seed. I think that there was some internal pressure from the players that they wanted to be the top seed in the playoffs, just like they were the year before. I don't necessarily think that that was the right call. And Denver, like, they paid the price for it, because not only did they not get the top seed, but they got into the bracket that included Minnesota, when I think they would have been better off against OKC or against Dallas for sure. But it's going to be fascinating to see how it breaks down. I'm curious to see how Russell Westbrook impacts things. Is he going to play all the games? Reggie Jackson played every game. Christian Brown played every game. You can't expect that to happen from Russell Westbrook and Christian Brown this year. How's Julian Strawther going to fare in his first full season in a rotation role? Peyton Watson, can he increase his role? He played a bunch of minutes last year, a bunch of games last year. I think he can play even more this year. And then having Dario Saric there instead of Zeke Naji, instead of DeAndre Jordan, maybe that gives Denver a little bit more of an effort to rest Nikola Jokic. Who knows? Who knows? I don't have the answers for everybody, but I do think that this is a very important piece of this upcoming season. Is Denver going to be healthy enough and rested enough to actually do the things that they want to do? Or are they going to have to fight, scratch, and claw to win 50 games because they have changed their starting lineup and because the chemistry may not be there initially? How much is Jokic going to have to put on his shoulders? How much is Murray going to have to put on his shoulders? Can those guys share the burden? Maybe can Michael Porter take on some scoring? There are a lot of factors at play, and I'm curious to see how they handle it. All right. Think that is going to do it for this episode of Pickaxe and Roll, people. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. Appreciate all the love and support on the podcast as always. Make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. I will do my best to do another episode this week. It seems like the schedule is coming out over the course, like Shams is just dropping some random games. Oh, I guess I forgot to talk about it. Denver got a Christmas game. They're playing the Phoenix Suns on Christmas. I'm going to guess it's the nightcap. I'm going to guess it's the 8:30 time slot. We will see what ultimately becomes of it, but looks like Kevin Durant is going to have a lot of angry Nuggets fans to contend with going forward. Should be fun. Everybody, that's going to do it. Hit that like button, hit that subscribe button on the way out. I will talk to you guys very soon.